There is a silent truth that many people over 60 carry inside themselves, and rarely put into words. Not because the truth doesn't exist, not because they don't feel it clearly, but because putting it into words means confronting it in a way that, as long as it remains unspoken, can still be kept at a distance. Treated as a vague worry, a background unease, something that perhaps isn't as serious as it feels. The greatest fear isn't aging. It isn't watching time pass. It isn't seeing the face change in the mirror. It isn't having to slow down or take better care of the body. Those aspects of aging are visible, are concrete, and in some way are easier to accept because they are shared. Everyone around you ages in the same way, and there's a certain solidarity in that. The greatest fear is different. It's the fear of feeling that the mind might fail exactly when you need it most. It's that specific anguish that appears after a moment of forgetting that shouldn't have happened. Not the occasional lapse, not the explicable slip caused by tiredness or distraction, but the forgetting that comes from a different place, that has a different quality, that carries with it a question nobody wants to ask out loud. What if this is just the beginning? Because behind simple acts of forgetting, there is an anxiety far deeper than the forgetting itself. The anxiety of losing independence, of reaching a point where tasks that were always completely automatic begin to require help, supervision, the constant presence of another person to make sure everything goes right. The anxiety of no longer trusting your own decisions, of hesitating before choices that used to be automatic, of checking and rechecking and still not feeling sure. The anxiety of feeling that the freedom built over an entire lifetime, with decades of work, of demonstrated competence, of earned autonomy, is slipping away silently and inexorably. That fear is far more common than any statistic can capture, because most people carry it completely alone. And to deal with that fear, many people reach for the most obvious solution, the one everyone recommends. The one that feels intuitively correct, because after all, it makes sense to exercise the mind the same way you exercise the body. Crossword puzzles, memory games, quick challenges on the phone, those colorful apps that promise to train the brain with timed exercises and rising scores, Sudoku, jigsaw puzzles, riddles. And yes, these stimuli have their value. Nobody is saying they're useless. They can activate attention, language, and reasoning for a few minutes at a time. They can create a sense of doing something for the brain. They can be enjoyable and socially engaging. But brain health specialists have been reinforcing something important that most people who rely exclusively on these activities have never heard stated clearly enough. Brain health depends on factors far larger than isolated mental pastimes. And the difference between doing crossword puzzles for an hour and implementing the 3 habits I'm going to reveal today can be, literally, the difference between a brain that keeps strengthening itself and a brain that continues declining, regardless of how many crosswords you complete. The reason has to do with how the brain actually works. The brain isn't a machine that improves simply by being used more intensively for a few minutes each day. It's a living ecosystem, extraordinarily complex, deeply interdependent with the rest of the body, and highly sensitive to the systemic conditions you create for it through your daily habits. The brain needs adequate circulation that guarantees the constant supply of oxygen and nutrients to an organ that consumes 20% of the body's total energy. It needs restorative sleep that allows the processes of cleaning, memory consolidation, and neural recovery that only happen during the deep phases of sleep. It needs genuinely new learning that stimulates neuroplasticity, not the repetition of familiar patterns, but the real challenge of processes the brain hasn't yet mastered. It needs physical movement that reduces systemic inflammation, improves cardiovascular health, and stimulates the production of neurotrophic factors that literally nourish neurons. It needs less chronic stress, because persistently elevated cortisol is directly toxic to the hippocampus, the brain region most critical for forming new memories. It needs, fundamentally, a healthy internal environment to continue functioning well. And crossword puzzles, however regularly practiced, don't create that environment. That's why specialists in neuroscience and healthy aging have come to advocate for 3 specific habits, supported by consistent, replicable scientific observations, not by theory or intuition or tradition, that offer the brain the type of support that actually matters for long-term cognitive function. This isn't about making more mental effort for a few minutes per day. It's about creating a body and a routine where the mind can renew, recover, and strengthen itself every single day. It was exactly from the observation of populations that naturally maintain these habits throughout life that researchers developed a new understanding of what truly protects the aging brain. You'll find it at the first link in the description. The first habit is daily movement, especially walking. This may seem too simple. It may feel like an understatement to suggest that regular walking can be more beneficial for the brain than hours of structured mental exercises. But the data says exactly that, and the mechanisms explain why. The first mechanism is the impact on cerebral circulation. The brain is absolutely dependent on a constant, efficient, abundant blood flow. Any factor that reduces that flow, less flexible arteries, poorly controlled blood pressure, sedentary living that reduces cardiovascular efficiency, directly impacts neural function. Neurons receiving less oxygen and less glucose function more slowly. Synapses with less vascular support transmit signals less efficiently. Walking is one of the most efficient stimuli for improving cardiovascular health and, consequently, cerebral circulation. 30 minutes of walking at a moderate pace produces immediate increases in cerebral blood flow that persist for hours after exercise. The second mechanism is BDNF production. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor is a protein that acts as literal fertilizer for neurons. It stimulates the growth of new synaptic connections, strengthens existing ones, and protects neurons from progressive degeneration. And aerobic exercise, walking, light jogging, cycling, swimming, is one of the most powerful stimuli for BDNF production that exists. Neuroimaging studies have shown that adults who exercise aerobically on a regular basis have, on average, larger hippocampal volumes, the brain region most directly associated with memory and learning. Not just in young adults. In adults of all ages, including people in their 70s and 80s. The third mechanism is the reduction of systemic inflammation. Low-grade chronic inflammation, that silent state of immune alert that inadequate diet, sedentary living, and unmanaged stress sustain over time, is one of the primary accelerators of cognitive decline. Regular exercise, through multiple biochemical pathways, is a powerful anti-inflammatory modulator. It reduces systemic inflammatory markers, improves insulin sensitivity that contributes to cerebral glycemic stability, and regulates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that controls the stress response. And the fourth mechanism is mood and anxiety regulation. Physical exercise stimulates the production of serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins, neurotransmitters that regulate emotional state, motivation, and stress resilience. And given that chronic anxiety and depressed mood are strongly associated with cognitive impairment, this effect has direct implications for memory and focus function. 30 minutes of walking, 5 times per week, can do for your brain what an hour of daily crossword puzzles simply cannot. Not because crosswords are useless, but because they don't access any of these systemic mechanisms that physical movement accesses. The second habit is deep and regular sleep. This is possibly the most underestimated habit on the entire list, and the most critical. Because sleep isn't simply the period when the brain shuts down. It's the period when the brain performs the most important and most irreplicable work that exists. Work that determines, to a large extent, with what clarity and reliability it will function the next day and across the years. The first nightly process is memory consolidation. During sleep, Especially during REM sleep and slow-wave sleep, the brain actively processes the information received throughout the day. It decides what to transfer to long-term memory and what to discard. It strengthens the synaptic connections associated with important learning. It integrates new information with existing knowledge in ways that are not possible during waking. When this process is interrupted by superficial sleep, by frequent waking, by not completing the necessary cycles, memory isn't adequately formed. And what seems like forgetting is often information that was never adequately recorded. The second process is glymphatic cleaning. The brain's glymphatic system, a network of channels surrounding the brain's blood vessels, operates primarily during deep sleep. It circulates cerebrospinal fluid through brain tissue, removing metabolic waste accumulated throughout the day, including proteins like amyloid beta, whose progressive accumulation is strongly associated with cognitive decline. Studies from the University of Rochester showed that this glymphatic flow during sleep can be up to 10 times greater than during waking hours. Every night of poor sleep is a night when that cleaning doesn't happen completely. And that accumulated deficit, repeated over months and years, has cognitive consequences that no amount of daytime mental exercises can compensate for. The third process is hormonal regulation. During deep sleep, the body secretes growth hormone, which participates in the recovery and repair of neural tissue. It regulates cortisol, whose chronically elevated levels are directly toxic to the hippocampus. It balances the neurotransmitters that affect mood, energy, and cognitive capacity the following day. Many people try to correct the effects of inadequate sleep with coffee in the morning. But coffee doesn't replace what should have happened during the night. It masks, temporarily at a cost, the deficit that continues accumulating. Going to sleep at the same time every day, creating a sleep environment that favors deep rest, reducing blue light exposure in the 2 hours before bed, and treating sleep quality as the health priority it is, can transform mental clarity in ways that surprise people with their consistency and depth. The third habit is real and continuous learning. And here is where the distinction between crossword puzzles and genuine learning becomes clearest. Crossword puzzles exercise vocabulary and knowledge you already have. They recruit neural networks that are already established, already familiar, already strengthened by decades of use. That has value, but it isn't the same as creating new connections. It isn't the same as expanding the brain's neural repertoire. It isn't what neuroscientists call cognitive stimulation with high neuroplasticity potential. Neuroplasticity, the adult brain's capacity to create new synaptic connections, reorganize neural roots, and grow in regions that were declining, is stimulated primarily by genuinely new challenges. By situations where the brain doesn't yet have an automated response. By processes that require different networks to connect in ways not yet established. Learning a genuinely new language. Not reviewing one you already know, learning a genuinely new one from scratch, where every grammatical structure, every piece of vocabulary, every sound pattern is unfamiliar. This process simultaneously recruits auditory processing regions, working memory, sequential reasoning, and language production. A cognitive demand that few activities replicate. Learning to play a musical instrument, especially for adults who have never played. Because the combination of notation reading, bimanual motor coordination, real-time auditory processing, and sequence memory creates one of the richest and most well-documented cognitive demands for neuroplasticity stimulation. Learning genuinely new technology, not using familiar applications, but learning to use tools you've never used, with logics you need to build from scratch. Learning a manual skill, woodworking, embroidery, cooking from a culinary tradition you don't know, reading content that challenges your established perspectives. The criterion isn't academic sophistication, it's genuine novelty. It's the presence of cognitive discomfort, that feeling of doing something you don't yet know how to do well. that signals the brain is forming new connections rather than just retracing existing ones. If you want to start this process today, implementing these 3 habits in a structured way, understanding the specific protocols that maximize their effects, and combining them synergistically, what researchers have isolated about this approach is available at the first link in the description. As simple as it always should have been. But there is an even more intimate emotional pain that needs to be named. Because behind all this discussion of habits and biochemical mechanisms, there is a human dimension that is frequently invisible in conversations about cognitive health. But that for those living the fear of decline can be the heaviest weight of all. Many people live with the specific fear of becoming a burden to their family. They don't want to worry their children. They don't want the household dynamic to start revolving around their limitations. They don't want to see in the eyes of the people they love that mixture of worry and pity that is so hard to bear precisely because it comes from genuine love. So they hide. They hide the forgetting. They compensate in ways nobody notices, or that everyone notices but pretends not to notice, because nobody knows how to address it either. They develop private systems of checking and confirming. They create conversational avoidance strategies to navigate the moments when memory fails. And alongside that self-imposed silence comes something that amplifies everything. The anxiety about what the lapses might mean. Every moment of forgetting seems potentially serious. Forgot a name? The heart races. Lost an object? Panic surfaces. Repeated a question? Anguish settles in. And the unspoken fear that was always there in the background rises in volume. Alzheimer's. Dementia. The words nobody wants to say out loud, but that pass through the mind after each more significant lapse. It's important to say something here with clarity. Not every moment of forgetting means disease. Chronic stress affects memory in measurable ways. Anxiety compromises the consolidation of new memories. Inadequate sleep prevents the formation of long-term memories. Certain medications interfere with cognitive function. Distraction and mental overload reduce the attentional capacity that is necessary for information to be adequately recorded. Many lapses that people attribute to something wrong with the brain are, in fact, consequences of addressable conditions that improve when the underlying factors are dealt with. At the same time, and this also needs to be said, ignoring persistent and progressive signs isn't the path forward. Correct information, medical evaluation when appropriate, and intelligent evidence-based prevention offer far more power than the silent panic fed by imagination. The good news, and there is genuine good news here, grounded in evidence and not empty optimism, is that the brain retains its capacity for adaptation throughout life. Even after 60, even after 70, after 80. Neuroplasticity has no expiration date. Neuroimaging studies have shown that older adults who implement the right habits, quality sleep, regular movement, genuine learning, anti-inflammatory nutrition, stress management, active social connection, show measurable structural changes in the brain. Increased hippocampal volume, greater white matter integrity, higher synaptic density in regions associated with memory and reasoning. This isn't theory, it's observable in MRI images. And the change doesn't require heroism, doesn't require radical transformation, doesn't require a dedication that a person with a real life cannot sustain. It requires consistency. A 30-minute walk today, not tomorrow, not when it works out, not next week. Today, repeated tomorrow, repeated the day after, built as an inevitable part of the routine, in the same way that brushing your teeth is an inevitable part of the routine. Sleeping better tonight. Turning off screens an hour before bed. Creating the environment that deep sleep needs to happen. Respecting a bedtime with the same seriousness with which we respect work schedules and external commitments. Learning something new this week. Not studying, learning. Finding something you genuinely don't know how to do, and beginning the uncomfortable and productive process of learning to do it. Repeating this for months, without waiting for immediate results, without giving up in the first week because the transformation wasn't dramatic. Knowing that the neural system responds to patterns, and that consistent patterns, maintained over time, produce changes that become increasingly perceptible as they accumulate. That is how real brain protection happens, not in a moment of inspiration, not in a week of intense effort followed by abandonment, but in small, repeated actions, day after day, that gradually create the environment in which the brain can do what it was always capable of doing. Recover, grow, respond. Aging doesn't have to mean losing the mind, doesn't have to mean losing freedom, doesn't have to mean becoming a burden to the people you love, losing the autonomy you built across an entire lifetime, or surrendering to the narrative of inevitability that so many people embrace as if it were a given destiny. The brain you have today, with all its history, all its accumulated wisdom, all its capacity to learn, to adapt, to respond, is capable of far more than the fear of lapses makes it seem. It just needs the right conditions. And the right conditions are more within your reach than you imagine. The complete method is in the pinned comment. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. In the upcoming videos, I'll keep showing you natural and intelligent strategies to strengthen memory, maintain autonomy, and help your mind keep working in your favor for many years to come.